What's up, everybody? Tony Farmer here from Tony Talks Football. We're coming to you live Wednesday, June 24th. Big, big, big news drop this morning for those of us who've been following the Diana Russini, Mike Vrabel story closely. The New York Times, surprise, has come out of nowhere with a surprise article featuring many bombshells about Diana Russini, the Mike Vrabel situation. I'm still processing it, guys. I just read it a couple minutes ago. I'm on the West Coast. I woke up to this news. I had a ton of phone notifications. Tony, have you seen this yet? Have you seen this yet? From people who know that I've been following this case closely. And we're going to run down all this information in this live stream today. It's a lot to digest. I'm telling you, I have a list of bullet points to talk about with you guys. And if there was just one or two things on this list, it would be a busy news day with a lot of articles being written, a lot of tweets from me and other people about this story. It's fascinating. Comments are rolling in already. Roll Coverage says, let's go. He seems excited for the show. Edmund comments on the article that I just referred to from the New York Times. Remember, guys, the New York Times owns The Athletic. The Athletic is doing the investigation into Diana Russini. We got a little bit of information about that investigation from New York Times. But Edmund says, what's up, brother? Explosive read, referring to that New York Times article. I liked how they walked us down the path. Very, very well-written article. Probably one of the better ones from the Times. I have to agree, Edmund. It was a very well-written article. It was very long. I wish I had checked. Maybe folks out there who've got it up in front of them can throw it into a word counter, Google word counter, and tell me how many words it was, because it was lengthy. I was sort of taking notes and making bullet points as I was reading it. And man, it took me a while to get through that article. There was some information we already knew, but there was a lot of new information. We've got Bob checking in saying good morning. Good morning, Bob. We've got Chunky checking in saying, I can't see how Vrabel survives this now. Lot of new information to talk about. But do me a favor, guys, if you're watching this on YouTube especially, chime in with the comments. I'm curious your thoughts about what I talk about today, but if you've already read the article, I would love to hear from you, because there are going to be ripples from this article, I promise you, throughout the sports world today, throughout social media today. This story has already become a worldwide sensation. We see places as far away as India, places like Spain talking about this story. And oh yeah, that was before the New York Times just dropped these multiple bombshells on us today. So like I said, I'm going to go through these bullet points, and I need to apologize in advance. I'm a little less prepared than I typically am for these shows. I really like to prepare and have myself ready. You guys saw it took a little while for me to go live here. My bullet points are all over the place. They're not in chronological order. So I want to apologize in advance, because I'm going to be jumping around today. I'm going to be talking about one subject from this article, and then I'm going to be talking about something else that has nothing to do with the prior subject, but is also a big deal. So bear with me, because this news just dropped very recently, and I'm trying to get live as quickly as possible so that we can digest this. I understand that in the United States, our attention spans are not very long. So to sit down and read a very, very, very lengthy New York Times article is not necessarily how people want to ingest information. So that's one of the reasons why I'm coming to you with this video, so that we can kind of all do this together. It looks like we've got 500 people already watching live. Pretty good for a live stream that I didn't know was happening about 90 minutes ago. So I'm excited that you guys are here. Again, feel free to comment. If you're watching on Twitter, if you can do me a favor and hit that retweet button, that'll help get more people in the chat and help spread this show so that more people see it. If you're watching on YouTube on Tony Talks Football, I'd appreciate it if you guys could like this video and give it a thumbs up. Like I said, we've got a lot to talk about, and we're going to dive into it right now. First thing that I thought was fascinating, The Athletic paid Diana Russini, according to the New York Times, about $800,000 a year. They had a source that was close to her negotiations with The Athletic. That in and of itself is news. That has nothing to do with Mike Vrabel. But if it hasn't already been written up into an article by the Page Sixes and the TMZs, Awful Announcing, all those folks, I promise you this will be a story at some point today, if it's not already. There's going to be people who say, oh my gosh, I can't believe she was behaving this way while being paid $800,000. You may also hear from the feminists out there who want to compare her salary to what the male insiders in the NFL were making. And I won't comment on whether I agree with that or not. I always try to steer away from political commentary and that sort of thing on my football show. Whether you agree with that feminist angle or not, I believe that will be written about. The fact that Diana Russini was making $800,000 a year, and people will compare that to her male counterparts in the field who are, the Adam Schefters, the Ian Rappaports, and things like that. So we'll just start with that. Diana Russini's $800,000 a year salary, according to the New York Times. I can't imagine Diana Russini loves that the New York Times made that public and reported her salary. And if we zoom out, before we get into the other bombshells from this story today, if we just zoom out, the feeling that I got as I was reading this article is that there seems to be a lot of, maybe I'll say, tension or perhaps disagreement from folks at The Athletic and New York Times, maybe even folks within those individual but connected organizations disagree with each other. And I got that feeling from reading the article because, again, the Times owns The Athletic. Good for them for mentioning that up front in the story, for reminding people of that who didn't know. But at times they're like, yeah, we reached out to executives at The Athletic and they didn't comment. We reached out to this writer at The Athletic and they didn't comment. It's like, wait a second. Don't you own that company? Shouldn't it be easy for you to get comment? Just ask for a favor? And I got the strong impression, this is just my opinion, I'm speculating here, that perhaps there's some disagreement and tension within these two organizations. I also got that impression because of how this article already in its short time in existence has been pushed or not pushed by the New York Times. Do you guys remember when I was criticizing ESPN for its big Russini story and how they handled it? Let's back up for a second. Again, we got a lot to talk about here with the New York Times, but when ESPN released Russini's story, they did it late on a Friday. They didn't release it on the ESPN Twitter account. They released it to their writer who only had 8,000 followers on Twitter, and they didn't retweet it from their account with 50 million viewers. You may recall that I said something to the effect of, that's weird. It's almost like they were checking a box. They wanted this story out there, but they didn't want to give it too much attention. And I think we should at least entertain the possibility that that might be happening with the New York Times here too. Because go ahead right now, go over to the New York Times Twitter account, and they haven't tweeted this article. When you go to New York Times website, I'm going to show you what you see right now, because you don't find this Diana Russini article very easily. This is the front page of the New York Times. And listen, guys, I know there's a lot more going on in the world than this story. We've got a war going on, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not suggesting this should be the very top story on New York Times, but considering how much of a story this has become, you'd think it would be somewhere on the New York Times main page, but it's not. You have to actually search for Russini, Vrabel, et cetera, as I did here, in order to find the story. And by the way, in this search, you can see they haven't said anything about Diana Russini since it looks like April 21st was the last time they said anything about Diana Russini. So I just want to point that out. The questionable positioning of this article. They don't retweet it. You have to search for it on the New York Times website. It's almost, this is my opinion, like folks at the New York Times wanted this out there, but didn't want it out there too much. Or like I said, maybe there's some disagreement. Maybe some people, some of the executives want it out there, but the social media folks don't. Or maybe one executive wants it out there and another one doesn't. So perhaps they are coming to a compromise. All right, we'll put it out there, but it's not going to be on the front page. We're not going to retweet it. That sort of stuff. Total speculation on my part, but I do think it's important to acknowledge that it's kind of odd the way that it's been handled so far in its very short existence. So, again, the one thing that we've covered so far was Diana Russini's $800,000 salary, according to the New York Times. Another interesting thing is the New York Times referred to the Athletics investigation being done by Mike Semmel, I think is the way to pronounce his last name. They referred to that investigation that everybody's been waiting for, and they said as part of their review, The Athletic is looking into Diana's involvement in a January 2025 article written by Zach Rosenblatt, somebody else at The Athletic. Zach was not willing to comment, apparently, to the New York Times, but they said that Russini essentially brokered this article for Rosenblatt. So this is our first clue of something that is going to be covered, apparently, according to the New York Times, in the Athletics investigation. That's a big deal because the Athletic has been very, very, very tight-lipped about what's going into this investigation. All we had known so far is that it was going to be lengthy and that it was going to focus on her journalism and not so much her conduct. Apparently, they're zeroing in on this 2025 January article from Rosenblatt, which, by the way, I need to go back and read because there's probably going to be something fascinating in there connected to this story. They said it's a 4,000-plus word article. So that's two things we've got so far. We've got Russini's salary from this article that we didn't know before, and that the Athletics investigation is focusing on this January, I shouldn't say focusing, is mentioning this January 2025 article titled Inside Mike Vrabel's Year Off, written by Zach Rosenblatt. And Russini apparently helped connect Rosenblatt to Vrabel for this story. Is it perhaps there's some flattering things written in that story? Perhaps Russini, speculation on my part, I don't know. This is my opinion. Is it possible Russini connected Rosenblatt to Vrabel for this story because she didn't want to write it herself? Why would Diana Russini not want to write that story herself? I need to go back and read it and perhaps try to answer that question, but I think that's fascinating. Another interesting thing that came out. Sorry, we got some comments rolling in here. Let's see what you guys are all saying. Any word on her car accident? There was nothing in this article about her car accident. Good question. Have some articles on my Twitter page about that accident, April 15th. We've got another comment that says, if that's where the focus of the investigation is, they're looking at things that don't matter and not bigger issues. Chunky apparently is feeling a little skeptical about the Athletics investigation. And you're not the only one, Chunky. I had this comment on Twitter right before I came on the show from Coach Harry Ellis. He said, personally, I think it's a lot of fluff meant to get in front of the investigation and maybe even keep it from going public. I did like that Rosenblatt caught a stray. Rosenblatt is that writer that I just referenced. I'm open to that idea. Overall, I think there are a ton of bombshells in this story. We're going to talk about them in this video. We've already started talking about them in this video. But I am open to the idea that this article was released very intentionally as sort of a CYA within the Times and the Athletic. I'm open to it because there was some, what I might call defensive writing, which we'll get into later, sort of like explaining why things that looked really bad actually happened behind the scenes. Here's how it really happened. I'm open to that idea that this was released intentionally at this time by the New York Times before the Athletics investigation as some sort of a 1-2-step process in order to plant some seeds with the public before the investigation comes out. Very open to that. And I think that we should all be very skeptical of everything that we hear in this case because there's been a lot of misinformation out there. There's been U-turns out there. People saying one thing like Mike Vrabel, this isn't worthy of comment, and then actually commenting twice. We've seen the Patriots say business as usual with Mike Vrabel, and then Mike Vrabel misses day 3 of the draft. We've seen The Athletic come out in defense of Diana Russini. By the way, this article talks about how and why that happened. And then we've seen The Athletic do a U-turn and say, actually, we're going to investigate this. So we should be very skeptical of everything that we hear, because a lot of what we've heard so far has been turned into a U-turn, has been apparently, in my opinion, turned out not to be true. So we should be skeptical, and I appreciate your guys' skepticism as you read this Bombshell New York Times article. So if you're just tuning in, so far we've talked about how the article mentioned Diana Russini's $800,000 salary. We've talked about how this article has kind of been positioned in an odd way. It's not been posted on Twitter yet for some reason. It's not on the front page, New York Times. And we've also talked about how The Athletic, apparently, according to the New York Times, has an interest in this January 2025 article titled Inside Mike Vrabel's Year Off, written by Zach Rosenblatt, that Diana Russini helped connect Rosenblatt and Vrabel for this article. Another interesting thing that I found fascinating. Remember the pictures of Diana Russini and Mike Vrabel at the roulette table shortly after Mike Vrabel was fired by the Tennessee Titans? Apparently, there were members of the Titans coaching staff that were along on that trip that were not in the photos. That's a big deal, and that's intriguing to me. Mike Vrabel had lost his job. I'm not sure which members of the Titans coaching staff were there and if they were still employed by the Titans or not. But let me tell you why this matters. Oftentimes, Diana Russini has quoted sources within the Titans organization. And a lot of people will assume that that source has been Mike Vrabel this entire time. And I think that's very plausible because of the timeline that's been laid out of Mike Vrabel and Diana Russini being photographed together in public, according to these publications. There hasn't really been any evidence that Diana Russini has a close connection to anybody else in the Titans organization besides Mike Vrabel. This is a clue. If she's hanging out in public at a casino, gambling with, or at least gambling around, other members of Mike Vrabel's coaching staff, this gives us insight into her connections with the Titans. I found that very interesting. Another interesting thing from this article that I read this morning from the New York Times was that Russini was given time to respond to the Sedona article. Remember, she was approached in her car, by the way, in a driveway of her home by someone from that outlet and said, hey, we're going to be writing this story. We'll give you a little bit of time to respond. Russini originally said, hey, this was a girls' trip, and then did not provide evidence of that over the next couple days. This article, New York Times article, specifically mentioned receipts and photos. So I don't know exactly what happened between the time she got a knock on her car window and a couple days later when she decided not to submit those things. The article kind of made it sound like, and again, I wasn't there, I'm not sure. The article made it sound like perhaps she said she could provide those things and then didn't. Or maybe not. Maybe the article was just pointing out that she didn't provide any evidence to back up her claims. But one of the more interesting things in this whole article, it was subtle, but I found it fascinating, was that The Athletic, by the time Diana Russini had communicated to them, hey, we got a problem here, these photos might be coming out of me and Mike Vrabel. I'm paraphrasing, of course. By the time The Athletic heard it, it was a couple hours before the deadline that Russini was given. In other words, the outlet gave Diana Russini some time to respond, and she didn't tell The Athletic until, I don't want to say the last minute, the last couple hours, a few hours before that deadline. She didn't tell her supervisors right away. She did contact executives at the New York Times, though. That's an interesting sort of chain of command decision that was talked about in this article. It'd be really interesting to talk to folks at the New York Times and The Athletic about that decision that Diana Russini made, according to the New York Times. I know that the New York Times owns The Athletic. I've read that there's some tension between The Athletic and the New York Times because of that stuff, this investigation. But how weird is it to go to the New York Times instead of your own supervisor? It strikes me as odd, but again, I'm not in those buildings, so I don't know for sure. More bullet points for you. The statement that, remember Ginsburg came out, the dude with The Athletic that came out and originally supported Diana Russini. That statement that he came out with, which he was criticized heavily for, was approved by The Athletic's executive director, last name Perpich, and David Rubin, the Times Company chief brand and communication officer. So that wasn't just a willy-nilly decision. That's just on his shoulders. Several people, several high-level folks in the organization approved that message, which has now been highly criticized, and the New York Times has done a U-turn from. The article talked about the New York Times editorial standards and the guidelines they expect their writers to live by, to work by, And within those standards, it talks about how Russini would have been expected to tell her editors that there was a conflict of interest between her and Mike Vrabel. The article tells us, for the first time ever, this is brand new news, that Russini didn't alert any of her editors to the conflict of interest involving Mike Vrabel. That's a big deal. A lot of people may have assumed this to be true already, but this is our first time hearing this from the New York Times. She did not tell anybody that this relationship was taking place. Now, this gets into the comment that I put up earlier about, is this the New York Times covering their butts? We didn't know about this. Diana never told us. She did this without her knowledge, throwing Diana Russini under the bus. It's possible. I don't know. But what I do know is that the New York Times is claiming that The Athletic, which they're a parent company of, was not notified of this close connection to Mike Vrabel. That's problematic from a journalism standpoint. We've got some comments rolling in. Joshua says, so none of her peers were in the loop. Joshua, I think you're referring to in the loop of Diana Russini's conduct and closeness with Mike Vrabel. That's a good question. This article, New York Times published today, was written with the help of some of Diana Russini's friends. I assume some of her colleagues as well. That's a good question, Joshua. Were her peers in the loop? Did people at The Athletic know that Diana Russini had this close relationship with Mike Vrabel? Maybe other people, by the way, but a close relationship to people in the NFL. Did they know? If they knew, did they tell their supervisors? According to this article today, the supervisors did not know. I'll let you guys decide if this is CYA from the New York Times and they're just trying to distance their executives about it. We didn't know. Or if that's legitimate. Or can both be true, that the New York Times executives didn't hear it from Diana Russini. She never reported it to them, the Athletic executives, but that they heard it from other places, perhaps peers, etc., and sort of looked the other way. These things are all possible. Roll coverage agrees, says that is problematic. I agree. It would be problematic that she did not disclose those things from a journalistic standpoint. Joe chimes in. This article clarifies it. Absolute panic for her between Easter Sunday and when she finally told the Athletic bosses. Damage control, trying to coordinate with Vrabel. Excuse me, all she could do to manage it. The article did also confirm that as well. According to the New York Times, Mike Vrabel and Diana Russini coordinated their communication after the photos from Sedona dropped. And so what was that communication? That communication was Diana Russini denying that anything inappropriate took place. Remember the unmoored from the facts? That communication was Mike Vrabel saying this was laughable. This was unworthy of future comment. According to the New York Times, that communication was coordinated by the two of them. A lot of people assumed that to be true already, but I had also heard a lot of speculation out there that they were kind of conflicting each other. Because Diana was like, essentially, I'm going to paraphrase, nothing inappropriate happened. And then Mike came out and was like, didn't take full accountability, but was like, yeah, I need to take some time away. And people assumed something happened. So some people have viewed that as them not being on the same page. This article paints the picture that this was a fully coordinated response. Now, I suppose it's possible that they tried to coordinate their response and couldn't agree on a response, and then perhaps there was tension between the two of them. Who knows? I'm speculating here. I'm not sure, but I suppose that's a possibility as well. But what we now know to be true, according to the New York Times, is that communication was at least attempted by Vrabel and Russini to coordinate the damage control about the Sedona photos coming out. Another interesting little tidbit, a friend of Russini's said that the reason she resigned, this is according to the New York Times, who interviewed a friend of Russini's. We don't know the friend's name. The reason that Russini resigned was that she saw an opportunity to reimagine her career and spend more time with her children. That wasn't featured in Russini's resignation letter. Russini's resignation letter did talk about the investigation that the Athletic was doing. I don't remember, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong on this, I don't remember that resignation letter saying it was an opportunity to reimagine her career. So that was an interesting tidbit. A former ESPN ombudsman, remember, Diana Russini used to work for ESPN, was quoted in this article and described Russini's contact with Vrabel as very flagrant. Strong criticism from a former ESPN ombudsman at the organization where Russini used to work. By the way, one of the questions that I have with the New York Times ownership of the Athletic and the Athletic doing this investigation into Diana Russini's journalism, is ESPN going to do an investigation? Like, think about the reasons why the Athletic is doing this investigation. I'd imagine it's for their own integrity because people are questioning them, especially with Ginsburg coming out and defending Diana at first. Like, a lot of people thought this investigation by the Athletic was going to go away once Russini resigned. But because this is a journalism organization and their integrity is at stake, and you can make an argument everybody that works at the Athletic in some way is sort of tainted by this, that the Athletic needs to address this. So if that's the case, and that's one of the reasons why the Athletic is looking into this from a journalistic integrity standpoint, why isn't ESPN doing the same thing? She worked there for over 7 years. So there's a lot of like public accountability concerns, like the Athletic needs to get us some answers and tell us what happened here. Why are people not interested in ESPN, where Diana Russini also worked for over 7 years, where Diana Russini also reported a lot of news involving Mike Vrabel's Titans? Diana Russini wasn't a Titans beat writer. She was an ESPN writer that happened to spend a lot of time with the Titans organization. And remember that Diana Russini's story about Tom Brady not coming to Tennessee was 4 days after she was pictured in that New York City bar with Mike Vrabel, dimly lit bar, leaning in. Those photos, in my opinion, appeared to show an intimate interaction, in my opinion. And that was while she worked at ESPN. So why isn't ESPN getting more criticism for this? We know that Steve Levy tweeted Diana Russini got a nearly impossible interview with Mike Vrabel and Mike Tomlin. We know that ESPN benefited from Rossini's relationship with Vrabel. That's indisputable. Their own employees have said so, essentially. The question is, did ESPN know they were benefiting from that relationship, the Vrabel-Rossini relationship? That's a big question, and I'm just dumbfounded why ESPN isn't answering questions. ESPN isn't even being asked questions. Is there a single journalist in the United States of America that's willing to ask the ESPN executive questions? I've tried. They won't respond to me. Why aren't people asking ESPN these tough questions? Did you know? We know that you benefited from this relationship with Diana Russini. Your own employees have said so in not so many words. Were you aware of it? Very simple question. Very common sense journalistic question to ask. No journalists in the U.S. are asking these questions. Outlets outside of the United States are asking these questions. But outlets inside the United States are not asking those tough questions, and I find that fascinating. We've got some other comments rolling in. A lot more to cover here, guys. I got a whole page of more bullet points. New information that we weren't aware of before this New York Times article this morning. Let's see. We've got a laugh emoji. I'm not sure where that came from, which comment it was, or if it was something I said or somebody else said for the laugh. Somebody said reimagining her career sounds like a Barstool show is incoming. Who knows? Yeah, could be a podcast. Who knows those next steps? I'm not going to pretend to know. Somebody says ESPN doesn't want to open the Pandora's box. I think I'd have to agree with that. The old can of worms analogy. They don't want to open it up because there could be other stuff inside there that wasn't intended to be for public consumption. Another comment about the reimagining her career, capitalizing off of this scandal. Interesting comment. Somebody says, this is in response to somebody else named Robert. Obvious assumptions from before the facts. That is indeed new. I guess there's a debate whether there's new information. There shouldn't be a debate. There's a lot of new information in this article today. Bob says, Coach of the Year vote. This wasn't talked about in the article. Once again, we've got a major article about Russini and Vrabel, and the facts and conflicts of interest were mentioned in this article. But the fact that she was a Coach of the Year voter, once again, wasn't mentioned. This is the one topic, the one angle of this story that nobody wants to touch, even when we're doing a deep dive. Somebody says, I'm the only one that's asked ESPN repeatedly on X. I haven't seen anybody else ask the question. Any other journalists ask the question? Chunky is not buying that the Athletics investigation is going to produce a lot of new information. Chunky's skeptical. I appreciate the skepticism, Chunky. All right, but let's move on because there's a lot more to cover here, as I promised. So let's recap what we got so far. Russini did not alert her athletic editors, according to the New York Times, about a conflict of interest involving Vrabel. Ginsburg's statement of support for Russini was approved by an executive editor and David Rubin from the Times. That wasn't just willy-nilly on his part. Russini was given time to respond to the Sedona photos, but didn't tell the Athletic executives until a couple hours before her deadline. Several days went by, apparently, according to the New York Times. I'd imagine once The Athletic learned that they didn't hear about it right away and that she talked to someone at the New York Times instead of them, that that probably didn't feel too good, I would guess. Members of Mike Vrabel's Titans coaching staff were present on the gambling trip when Vrabel and Russini were pictured playing roulette. They weren't in the photos, but they were there that night. That's fascinating. Which members of the Titans coaching staff were there? We also heard that The Athletic will be zeroing in on, those are my words, The Athletic will be mentioning a 2025 article by Zach Rosenblatt, which Russini helped broker between Rosenblatt and Vrabel. And my question is, why didn't Russini just write that herself? She's written a lot of articles on Mike Vrabel already. She's interviewed Mike Vrabel a lot of times on camera already. Why was she the broker, the middleman, the middlewoman, if you will, in that article? Why didn't she just write that herself? That's very interesting. But moving on, because there's a lot more to cover here. I'm looking at my notes. Oh, this was interesting. Ginsburg, remember, Ginsburg came out in support of Russini and essentially, I'm going to paraphrase, essentially said, like, Diana's a great reporter. Nothing inappropriate was happening here. These photos were taken out of context. He wasn't given all the photos. He didn't have all the information. Now, is it possible this is CYA from the New York Times? Hey, give our guy a break. He made that U-turn and he said that he didn't have all the information. Is that possible? Absolutely. Here are two other possibilities that I thought of. Is it possible that the Post, before they released this story, didn't give Diana all the photos? They held some back. Almost as like a test. Maybe they held the good ones back, like the interlocking fingers, the most problematic photos. I don't know which ones he saw, but according to the New York Times, he didn't have all of them. They said he had at least one. So what if he saw some of the more benign photos? Got two explanations for why that would happen. As I said, maybe the Post didn't share them all because the Post didn't want Russini and The Athletic to know how much they had. This would not be an uncommon tactic from a journalist. In fact, I used a similar tactic myself when I reached out to Page Six and said, hey, I've got some information that your story about Diana Russini's accident is not accurate. I didn't tell them all that I had. I didn't tell them that I had the body cam footage, etc. I told them that I had some information. And it's almost a way to sort of test the other side and see how honest they're going to be. If they know the full information, if they know the full scope, you might get a different reaction if they don't. So that's possible. Another possibility, perhaps the more likely possibility here, is that Diana Russini herself was given all of the photos from the Post, including the interlocking finger photos, and she decided to be a filter. That's an interesting possibility. But how do we go from the Page Six, the Post, publishing multiple photos, to the New York Times saying their editor only received at least one, but not all of them? Something happened. Maybe they only had one at first and they got extra later. That's possible as well. But the other possibility here is that Diana Russini held back photos to make herself look better. That is a possibility, in my opinion. That she didn't want to look bad to her bosses, so she didn't provide all of the photos. Her bosses then made a statement in support of Diana without the whole picture. That would explain the U-turn, wouldn't it? I'm not sure what happened. I wasn't there. This is my opinion. But wouldn't that explain the U-turn that took place? Where the Athletic originally supports Diana, and they're like, wait a second, we're doing an investigation. Perhaps Diana didn't give the full story. We know she didn't tell them right away. Perhaps she also didn't give the full story. Another fascinating piece of this article, right in the beginning of it, the article opens up talking about how Diana Russini was pulled over by a police officer for texting and driving. They said it wasn't the first time that this had happened recently. Apparently, she'd been pulled over before for texting and driving. Now, let me say something here. Diana Russini is not a terrible person for texting and driving. It's very common these days. Doesn't make her a bad person. Apparently, her kids were in the car. Not a great look. Throughout this story, we have seen what appears, in my opinion, to be attempts by PR folks or folks who have PR knowledge to sort of highlight the family image aspect of Vrabel and Russini. Remember, we had the engagement photos from a member of Vrabel's family come out. We have Vrabel going home to support his wife instead of going to day 3 of the draft. And then we had the Pete Schrager report that was conflicting, where he wasn't talking to the Patriots. He was talking to the Patriots during day 3. Oh, no, actually, he wasn't talking to the Patriots. In my opinion, that perhaps that change was to make Mike Vrabel look more like a family man. This is interesting that she's texting and driving with her kids in the car, gets pulled over by the police. And you're not going to believe this next part if you haven't heard this already. The police officer, she mentions the Bills. And the police officer says, I'm not a Bills fan. And I'm going to paraphrase here because I read the article a little while ago. I don't have it in front of me. But essentially what happened is he discloses which team he is a fan of. Diana Russini, according to the Times, and apparently she said this publicly, gets the head coach of the police officer's favorite team on the phone as she's sitting in her car a couple feet away from the officer, and gets that head coach on the phone. The Times says it was not Mike Vrabel. I'm fascinated to know what head coach that was. There's 31 other coaches that it could be. Diana Russini is apparently close enough to another head coach in the NFL that she felt comfortable enough. Let's call this what this is. This was her asking for a favor, right? In my opinion. Is that fair to say? She felt close enough to another head coach not named Mike Vrabel, and not a member, not the Bills head coach, wasn't McDermott, or wasn't the Bills head coach. So one of 30 other head coaches that it could be. We got people chiming in on this one. I guess you guys, if you're hearing this from me for the first time, you might not have read the article. Maybe I buried the lead a little bit. That was literally the lead. That was the beginning of the story. She's talking to this police officer after she gets pulled over. She finds out who his favorite head coach is, and she gets that head coach on the phone, and the head coach picks up. And essentially, again, I apologize, I don't have the article in front of me. But essentially, she says, hey, coach, would you like to say hi to my friend, Officer so-and-so? Perhaps an attempt to get out of this speeding ticket. Is that fair to say? Is it fair to say that Diana Russini used her connections in the NFL to try to get out of a speeding ticket? According to the New York Times, the Athletic wasn't too happy about that. But she kept her job. They weren't unhappy about that enough for her to lose her job. Was she disciplined for that? I don't know. That would be fascinating to see. Will this interaction be a part of the Athletics investigation that the Athletic may make public any day now? Will the Athletic come out and mention in their investigation about Diana Russini's journalism that, oh, yeah, we had a private conversation with her about this car pulling over incident with the police officer? Somebody commented, could be Brandon Beane, GM of the Bills. Not a coach, but Tony reported that he was affectionate with Vrabel. I did report that. That was at the Biltmore in Arizona a couple days after the Sedona photos were taken. And I had a source there who said that they were Vrabel gave Beane a very big hug, kind of lifted him off the ground, kind of roughhoused him, like, hey, bro. It does appear, based on that source that I had at the Biltmore, that Vrabel and Beane were very close. By the way, I'm going to go off on a tangent here. I just find this fascinating. I had a second source who was there. I reported this previously, but I don't think a lot of people saw it. I had a second source there who I asked about the Beane thing. I said to my source, hey, I heard that Vrabel gave Brandon Beane a big old hug, kind of lifted him off the ground, and was kind of buddy bro with him. And my source says, I didn't see that. But what I did see is what you just described, Tony. I saw that behavior with Pat McAfee. And Pat McAfee and Mike Vrabel were inseparable that night. Now, I'm not breaking any news here because I've previously said this, but I don't think it's been talked about enough because we've been asking, why is Pat McAfee so quiet? He ignored this story for a really long time and then just started touching about it. He won't talk about the Coach of the Year angle. He won't talk about the fact that Diana Russini is the Coach of the Year voter. He won't talk about the important aspects, in my opinion, of this story. He's just started to talk about it. And we're all like, why isn't Pat McAfee talking about it? Is it because ESPN's trying to silence Pat McAfee? Perhaps. But according to my source, those two were very close that night. And this was before the Sedona photos came public, after the pictures were taken, but before Vrabel and Russini even knew that those photos were coming out. Mike Vrabel and Pat McAfee like that at the Biltmore. Interesting. Sorry for that tangent there. Somebody says, do you think the Athletic is waiting for the season to get closer to drive engagement for a potential article? Fascinating question. I think that's plausible. However, to play devil's advocate, you could also make an argument that there are people at the Athletic that don't want the engagement. Remember when the ESPN, I said this earlier, when the ESPN article came out, they didn't put it on their main Twitter page. They had their writer with 8,000 followers put it out. They didn't retweet it from their account with 50 million followers. This article that came out today from the New York Times is nowhere on their main website. You have to search for it. As of an hour ago, when I went live, I hadn't seen this article tweeted out by the New York Times. So, good question. I do think it's possible that the Athletic is being strategic, that maybe this report's already written and they're just waiting for the right time to release it. But what is their definition of the right time? I think is up for debate. Do they want maximum exposure or do they want minimum exposure to this article? I don't know because I don't know the contents of what they're going to be putting out. But it's fair to ask, and it's a great question on your part. I appreciate that question. All right, moving on. There's still a lot more to talk about here, guys. Recap some of the major points. Diana Russini's $800,000 salary at the Athletic, according to the New York Times. Ginsburg, who supported Diana Russini originally, did not have all the photos. And it's possible that Russini held photos back. It's possible that Page 6 held those photos back. We don't know. But apparently Ginsburg didn't have all those photos. Now, if you are going to take the perspective that we should be skeptical of this New York Times article and maybe this is a CYA operation, which I think we should all at least leave some room in our brains for, I think a fair question to ask at this point is, if Ginsburg didn't have all the photos, why didn't he say that previously? Right? That's a great defense. People are questioning why you defended Diana Russini. Why did you immediately jump to her defense, Mr. Ginsburg, without investigating? He got a lot of heat. A lot of heat for that. Some people would say the entire reason this investigation is happening is because of those comments. It's interesting to me that he didn't defend himself by saying, hey guys, the reason that I didn't be more critical of Diana and that I took her side is because I didn't have all the information. I only had one photo or two photos. That's worthy of examination. That's worthy of questioning. Maybe he didn't want to throw anybody under the bus. Maybe he didn't want to throw Diana under the bus. Maybe it's not true. Maybe he had all the photos and this is a CYA operation from the New York Times to make it seem like he didn't have all the photos. That's going to be fascinating. If we hear from Diana Russini in the future, I don't know if we will or not. I suspect we will at some point. That's my guess. And a journalist is sitting down and interviewing Diana Russini. This is one of the questions they should ask. Did you provide Ginsburg, your supervisors, your executives, Diana, did you provide them with all of the photos that you were provided? Because it's possible Diana did nothing wrong here and did provide everything that she had. And the outlet didn't provide them to Diana. It's also possible that Diana acted as a filter and held back some of the more incriminating photos. And it's also possible that the New York Times is lying right now and Diana did provide all the photos. And they're saying they didn't receive all the photos so that they can make themselves look better. This is going to be a very important question to ask in the future. We've got a comment here. Bradley Cooper. Oh, people are talking about who's going to play who's going to play Vrabel and Russini in the Hollywood film that perhaps will be happening in the future, the hypothetical film. All right. Good stuff. More to talk about here. A lot more. Looking through my notes, looking through my bullet points here. New York Times said it was the second time that Russini got pulled over for texting and driving. And the New York Times referred, remember I said that's not a good look to call an NFL head coach and use your NFL contacts to get out of a speeding ticket. The New York Times called this an abuse, or wrote that this was an abuse of professional access for personal gain. Okay, I would agree. But if this was an abuse of professional access for personal gain, why did she keep her job after that? Did they discipline her after this took place? Another big question that might be answered in the Athletics investigation. An abuse of professional access for personal gain. Will we see more examples of abuses of professional access for personal gain in the Athletics investigation that's going to be coming out? This is another thing I thought was fascinating. A friend of Russini was interviewed by the Times and said that in the time period from when Mike Vrabel was fired by the Titans, the time period after that where he was looking for a job, And when he was photographed with Vrabel at the casino, we now know with other Titans coaches, apparently, according to the Times. During that time period, Russini served as an unofficial advisor to Vrabel as he was looking for his job. That may seem very benign, but we need to talk about this. Because I have published video, not published my original video. I've shared video on my Twitter account of Russini talking very glowingly and in a very flattering manner about Mike Vrabel's interview with the New York Jets. The Jets supposedly, according to Russini and her source, is it possible Mike Vrabel was that source? Something to ask. According to Russini's source, Vrabel knocked the door off that interview with the Jets, and the Jets were willing to give him total control of the team. According to Russini, the Jets were willing to give Mike Vrabel a lot of money. This is from Russini on her podcast. If she was acting as an advisor, what does an advisor do? This is her friend's words, according to the Times. An advisor. What does an advisor do during a job search? An advisor helps you during a job search. The goal is getting a job. I just find it interesting that a friend of Russini, according to the Times, says Russini was working in an advisor role while Mike Vrabel was looking for a job, and we know Russini was speaking very flatteringly of Mike Vrabel during his job search. Is it possible that that was coordinated? Is it possible that Mike Vrabel asked Diana Russini to say those things? Whether they're true or not, they could be true. They could be absolutely true. Mike Vrabel's a very competent head coach. I have no doubts that he could have knocked the doors off, blown the doors off of the Jets interview. But if she was acting what we learned today from the New York Times in an advisor role to Mike Vrabel, which, boy, that's strange wording, isn't it? How is an NFL reporter advising a very competent and successful NFL coach during a job search? That's another question Diana Russini should be asked. According to the New York Times, Diana, your friend says that you were acting in an advisor role for Mike Vrabel during his job search after he was fired by the Titans and roughly around the time that you were photographed playing roulette with him and other Titans coaches. What were you doing in that advisor role? How were you helping Mike Vrabel during that job search? That's fascinating to me. We've got lots of comments rolling in. Jim says NFL announcers and journalists should not serve as consultants. Reminds me of Brady owning pieces of the Raiders while working at Fox. You just alluded, Jim, to another conflict of interest. This story has so many potential conflicts of interest here. Karen says that was an excuse for their spouses. Terrible look. Karen, I don't disagree, but I'm not 100% sure exactly when you hit that enter button, so I don't know in what exactly you were saying that was in reference to, but I appreciate the comments. Feel free to clarify if you'd like. Someone brought up Aikman consulting the Dolphins. More potential conflicts of interest here. Someone says, someone in the press serving as an advisor that impacts other teams. Obviously a conflict. Diana Russini is an insider. She collects information. It's a big part of her job. She's advising Mike Vrabel, her friend, during his job search. I'm just curious what that advising looks like. I think that's a good question to ask. We've got a comment here. Elite character choices. Perhaps some sarcasm there from Justin. Joe says he tried to help her, but once the initial lie fell apart, Mike had to kick her under the bus. He couldn't be a leader of men rolling with such a blatant falsehood. Thanks for sharing that comment there, Joe. Feel free to comment, guys. I'm going to recap here what we've talked about so far, what we learned from this bombshell article that came out of nowhere this morning from the New York Times. We learned that Diana Russini's salary is $800,000. As I said at the top of the show, that in and of itself is going to become a story. Feminists out there, rightfully or wrongfully, I don't want to get into politics or controversial beliefs. There will be stories written about Diana Russini's salary comparative to other men who have similar insider jobs, the Adam Schefters, the Ian Rappaports, who make more money than Diana Russini. And there's also going to be people that say, Diana Russini, apparently, according to the New York Times, was not acting in a manner that made her supervisors happy. How could you do such a thing when you're making $800,000? There's going to be a little bit of that too. So her salary is noteworthy here. The other interesting thing that we learned, if you're just joining us, is that members of Mike Vrabel's coaching staff on the Tennessee Titans were present the night that the gambling roulette photos took place. And why that's important, coaches are allowed to gamble and are allowed to play roulette. That's not the significant piece here. The significant piece is that we learned Diana Russini has close connections to, close enough to hang out with them at a casino, to other members of Mike Vrabel's coaching staff. It'd be fascinating to know who those members were, if some of those were maybe members that followed Vrabel from the Titans to the Patriots. I think that's interesting. Russini didn't alert any of her editors, according to the New York Times, to the conflicts of interest between her and Vrabel. At no point, according to the New York Times, did Diana Russini say, hey, I might be getting a little too close with Mike Vrabel. That is what would be expected of her. And then a dialogue would then take place between her and the executives, her and her supervisors. What should we do now? Should we pull you off this beat? Should we disclose this to the public? Like, at no point, according to the Times, did she take that approach, which any journalist would tell you. This isn't an athletic thing. Any journalist would tell you that's the move. If you feel yourself getting too close to a source, politics, sports, etc., you alert your supervisor. That's the expectation. She did not do that, according to the New York Times. The other information that we learned is that Diana Russini was pulled over by a police officer, found out the police officer's favorite team, and immediately got that head coach of that team on the phone to say hello to the officer. Interesting behavior. And the Athletic knew about it. Apparently, Russini talked about this publicly. The Athletic found out about it. And Russini was apparently, from what I'm understanding reading this article, still employed after the Athletic found out about that. Interesting. It makes me think about the Mike Silver situation right now. Remember, Mike Silver is very close with Diana Russini. Mike Silver has not commented on the Mike Vrabel Diana Russini situation since it happened. Mike Silver, according to Chrissy Freud, liked two of her bikini photos, and another photo of her wearing a skirt. Mike did not like Chrissy Freud's photos of her on the sideline wearing press credentials. He apparently just liked the photos, the 3 photos, where she was showing skin. The Athletic's own standards, when you read them, talk about behavior on social media and not doing unprofessional things on social media. I'll let you guys decide. I'll let The Athletic decide if that was unprofessional or not. But I haven't heard anything from The Athletic since this came out. And it's possible The Athletic is looking the other way. Sorry, didn't see that. We didn't notice. So my question is, did The Athletic look the other way when they heard this story about the police officer incident? About Diana Russini being pulled over by police for texting and driving with her children in the car, and then getting that police officer's favorite team's head coach on the phone immediately, apparently, this is all according to the New York Times, apparently in an effort to get out of the speeding ticket. Another thing that I haven't talked about on this live stream, I'm recapping what we have talked about so far, but this one I forgot about. 2 weeks before the Sedona photos dropped, Diana Russini was in a room full of executives, New York Times, The Athletic, and she's talking about Mike Vrabel. And I think this is fascinating because if you're one of the executives that has a decision to make, whether it's to hold Diana accountable, etc., after the Sedona photos come out, that's got to be in the back of your mind, right? As you're trying to figure out, wait a second, is Diana Russini too close to Mike Vrabel? Were these photos taken out of context? As you're trying to problem solve and figure out what the heck is going on, you might in the back of your mind think back to 2 weeks prior when Diana Russini herself was talking about Mike Vrabel in front of you. And in a room full of New York Times executives, Diana Russini used as an example her interview with Vrabel, where she was able to get him to open up a little bit. She asked Mike Vrabel about, this is a very popular clip, by the way. She asked Mike Vrabel about his pet peeves. And Mike Vrabel talked about his pet peeves involve people parking in handicapped spaces. And she talks about this with the executives and about how Vrabel's kind of like fired up about this and animated. And she jokes to the executives, according to the New York Times today, what is wrong with him, with Vrabel? What is wrong with him? What is wrong with the Kraft family for hiring this man? Seemed like it was a joking tone, but she's saying this about the man that she's apparently had a secret connection with for at least 6 years. A connection that she did not disclose to her supervisors. So she doesn't tell her supervisors that she had previously, according to reports, hung out with Mike Vrabel at a New York City bar, dimly lit bar in 2020, and then 4 days later broke the story about Tom Brady. Tom Brady not coming to Mike Vrabel's Titans. She doesn't mention that she's that close with Mike Vrabel, but she does make a little joke, a little breadcrumb, a little joke 2 weeks before the Sedona photos drop, 2 weeks before she hangs out with Mike Vrabel. Oh, by the way, this was another interesting little tidbit. The article from the New York Times today mentioned that the rooftop at that Sedona resort, the $2,000 plus Sedona resort that Mike Vrabel and Diana Russini were at, was only accessible through a private room. In other words, it wasn't like a public open space. That's the first time we heard that, to my knowledge. And that's noteworthy as well. So, because I've been asking the question, who paid for that Sedona trip? And some people have been saying, well, they could have been there separately, unknowingly, and ran into each other, and they had their own separate rooms. And that was an interesting piece of information from that New York Times article today. There was so much in there. That article was long and loaded with information. Jim says, will Pat McAfee discuss the New York Times piece? Nope. I tend to agree with you. He probably won't. And if he does, Jim, it'll be in an unserious manner. Just like Pat McAfee has covered this case, the rare times he has, it's in an unserious manner. He doesn't mention the serious concerns. Did you guys know this? This is another thing that Pat McAfee won't mention. Did you see the article that I wrote about how Diana Russini told her good friend, PFT commenter, told her good friend, who is a sports bettor and who had previously bet on the 2024 Coach of the Year market? Remember, it was Josh Allen versus Lamar Jackson. 2 days before, this is all public, this is on a podcast. 2 days before that award is announced, Diana Russini, one of 50 Associated Press awards voters, tells her sports betting friend who is going to 100% win that award before it's public. And she tells him Lamar Jackson 100% is going to win. I've since talked to 2 different Associated Press voters. Remember, there's only 50 of them. I've talked to 2 of them, and they've confirmed the Associated Press does not want you telling people who you voted for. Diana Russini told her friend that the person she voted for, Lamar Jackson, we now know that, was going to 100% win. To me, in my opinion, that's worse. She didn't just say who she voted for, and I guess technically speaking, she didn't say, I voted for Lamar Jackson. We don't know that for sure. But she said, this is who's going to 100% win. She later said that was a joke. She was joking with her friend. She was messing with him because she knew that he had a big bet on it. That doesn't look good. I can't imagine the Associated Press likes the look of that. I can't imagine DraftKings likes the look of that because this was said on a show that was sponsored by DraftKings. Chunky asks, did Lamar win? He didn't win. Josh Allen wins the award. Josh Allen, by the way, who had a $1.5 million incentive in his contract if he won MVP. Diana Russini is on the record as telling Josh Allen, she admits she lied to Josh Allen. She admits it. She tells Josh Allen, I'm going to vote for you to win this award. Before the award comes out, she tells her friend Lamar Jackson's going to 100% win, and she votes for Lamar Jackson. I haven't seen Diana Russini do an interview with Josh Allen since this took place. Previously, she had. Is there now tension between Russini and Josh Allen? I'm not sure. But they apparently had a good relationship before, good enough for her to interview him. And I haven't, with my own eyes, seen any interviews take place. And she joked, I think it was a joke, she joked on the podcast that something to the effect of like, I need to like not run into Josh Allen or something like that. She joked about it being awkward between her and Josh Allen is what I'm trying to say. And they haven't had any interviews since, public ones that I've seen. I wonder if they've talked. I wonder if she's apologized. I'm not sure. There was no indication that she had apologized to Josh Allen. Again, to recap here, what has come out today in the New York Times bombshell for people that are just tuning in? Several new pieces of information. We learned that The Athletic paid Diana Russini around $800,000 a year, according to a source close to her salary negotiations at The Athletic. This is all from the New York Times. Everything that I say here is according to the New York Times. Russini was sent, I actually didn't mention this already. I can't believe I didn't mention this because this is a bigger thing here. Russini was sent an outline of the Times article, the one that we all read today. She declined to comment. But back in May, when the Times began reporting on this article, she did respond via text. She texted the New York Times some information and then asked that those texts not be included. She's a journalist. She knows how this works. She knows what off the record means and all that sort of stuff. She didn't, according to the Times, say before the conversation started, hey, this is off the record. She talked and then apparently later said, I don't want you to use this information in your article. And as the article pointed out, this interaction, this is me quoting the New York Times here. This interaction demonstrated a different approach to journalism from the way it's conducted in traditional newsrooms. You think? You don't typically have a conversation with a reporter and then afterwards say, oh, by the way, that's all off the record. You can't use that. That's sort of established up front. That's traditionally how it happens. I've had many off the record conversations myself in the last 2 months alone. You establish that up front. Sometimes it's a condition of the communication. Oftentimes I'll reach out to people who I know won't want to talk publicly and will say, hey, I'd like to talk to you off the record. They agree. Okay, it's off the record. I'll talk to you now. According to the Times, this didn't happen with Russini. And she said some things and then later said, I don't want you to use it. And then when the person texting her said, no, I'm going to use this. You didn't say off the record. This is fair game. Russini then emailed executives. I'm going to see, I have in my notes who. It was folks at the Times and The Athletic. Basically saying, hey, this reporter is going to use this information. I don't want them to. It's interesting because Diana Russini should know how that works, being a writer herself. But it's also interesting because Diana Russini, since this situation took place, and according to the New York Times, coordinated communication with Mike Vrabel and had these public statements come out. We had her public resignation statement. We've not heard a peep from Diana Russini. We've had some photos of Diana Russini in public, but Diana Russini has not said a word. She did say a word in May, apparently. Interesting that the Times didn't just release that then. It's June 24th. This was back in May. You've got a subject that you're writing a story about who has not said a peep besides public statements shortly after April 7th. And now you have her first public comments since then. It's kind of a big deal. And you don't release them in May. You hang on to them till June 24th. Maybe there's some legal stuff going on here. Maybe the Times needed to talk to lawyers about, can we release this? I'm not sure, but that's interesting. Interesting that we thought Diana Russini hadn't talked to any journalists. Apparently she did in May, according to the Times. She talked to them through text and then later said, I don't want you to use any of that. I'm going to be paraphrasing there. It's according to the Times. She expressed she didn't want that information used. The writer said, oh, I'm going to use it. Again, I'm paraphrasing. The writer said, I'm going to use this information. She then emails executives at the Times and the Athletic and said, I don't want you to use this information. Diana Russini should know how that works, the whole off-the-record process. And let me break it down for folks who don't have a journalism background. So when you're talking to someone, there's on the record, which is open. You see it all the time and people quoted in articles. There's off the record, which means I'm going to give you some information, but you can't use it. And there's something in between, which is oftentimes referred to as on background, which is like, I'm going to give you some information. Don't use my name. You can't use my name, but you can use it in your investigation, in your story. You can use some of the information I gave you without my name attached to it. So as an example, I might talk to somebody on background at ESPN, and this person at ESPN says, Tony, you've been asking questions about why it is that ESPN handled the Russini story the way that they did, and they didn't post it on Twitter. Tony, I'm going to give you on background the name of the individual who actually is responsible for that department. This is the person, Bob Smith, that made that decision at ESPN. I can use that information to now, okay, I'm going to contact Bob Smith. Hey, Bob, this is Tony. I'm doing an article. I'm told you're the person that makes this decision. I'm not going to say who I told it from, and I'm not going to print who I told it from, but it's helpful information on background. So there's on the record, off the record, non-background. Journalists know this. And Diana Russini apparently didn't go off the record, according to the New York Times, sent some texts, and then later after that said that she didn't want the information used. The reporter said, I'm going to use it. I'm paraphrasing here. And then she contacted executives to say, I don't want this used. Jim chimes in and says, I could see a journalism school offering an entire course on this scandal. Chunky says, who is Bob Smith? Chunky is a great troll today. Chunky, I think you know that I was using a hypothetical example. There isn't a Bob Smith in this story. But in the story that I was using, in the hypothetical example, Bob Smith would be the person that I was reaching out to at ESPN. I think you're smarter than that. Again, recapping, Diana Russini's $800,000 salary, according to the folks at The Athletic. According to the New York Times, that's how much she's making from The Athletic. Diana Russini was pulled over by a police officer for texting and driving with her children in the car. Oh, man. I might be able to get that body cam footage. You guys remember I got the body cam footage from the April 15th accident? I'm going to have to look into that as soon as I end this. That would be fascinating, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be interesting to get the body cam footage of the police officer pulling Diana Russini over and Diana Russini saying, I've got the head coach of your favorite team on the phone. Would you like to say hello? Diana Russini, apparently, according to the Times, using her NFL connections to try to get out of a ticket. That would be really interesting footage. But that was a big part of this story. It wasn't the first time that she was pulled over for texting and driving. Her children were in the car. And she got the head coach of the cops' favorite team on the cell phone. Apparently, the texting involved the Bills. And the cop wasn't a Bills fan. But wasn't a Bills coach that she called. Let's work through this together. The cop wasn't a Bills coach. The cop wasn't a Bills fan. The cop wasn't a Patriots fan. So there's 30 teams left. But if we assume for a moment that this took place around the New Jersey, Philadelphia area, now, of course, there could be fans in that area that are fans of teams in San Francisco and Los Angeles. But if you had to take a guess, wouldn't that coach more likely be Nick Sirianni? Wouldn't that coach more likely be perhaps the Jets head coach, Aaron Glenn? Perhaps the Giants head coach? Geographically, you'd think that head coach would be closer to that area, not Bills, not Patriots. How about Philadelphia, Jets, Giants? Total speculation on my part. We don't know who the head coach was. I'm very curious, though. Will NFL beat writers of the 30 other NFL head coaches ask the question, hey, apparently you were one of 30 people who could have possibly been involved in this situation. Just want to check, coach. You're the head coach of the New York Giants. You're the head coach of the New York Jets. Was it you? Will beat writers ask that question? Wasn't the Bills head coach. It wasn't the Pats head coach. It was one of 30 others. Which head coach was involved in that? Now, I suppose the head coach may have been unaware that Diana Russini was attempting to utilize her NFL sources to allegedly potentially get out of a speeding ticket. Theoretically, this isn't necessarily a bad look. I think it's a bad look. I wonder what the conversation was like after the cop walked away. Thank you so much. Something like that, perhaps. Oh my God, thank you. You just got me out of a speeding ticket. I owe you one. Who knows? Who knows? I'm speculating. Wasn't there. But we should ask the questions. The NFL should be curious. Fans should be curious, in my opinion. Who was the head coach that Diana Russini got on the phone? Who is Diana Russini close enough with that she felt comfortable calling? I have people that I'm close to in my phone, and this isn't me bragging or name dropping or anything like that, who, if I was in a situation like that, have enough name recognition that it would help me. Okay? I have those contacts in my phone. Some of them I would consider friends. Most of them I would not consider calling in that situation because I'm not that comfortable with them. You know what I'm saying? I'm not comfortable enough with these high-profile people to essentially ask for that favor. Diana Russini was comfortable enough with this non-Vrabel head coach to call him on FaceTime, turn the phone, and say, hey, will you say hi to my friend Officer so-and-so? I'm paraphrasing. I wasn't there. Jim says, horrible look. I have to agree. There's going to be a lot of speculation about who what head coach was, because not only is it a bad look, in my opinion, for Diana and the head coach, it also speaks to how close Diana was with that head coach, right? This whole thing, this whole story is about potential conflicts of interest and Diana Russini being a little too close to Mike Vrabel and not telling her editors, according to the New York Times, that she was a little too close to Mike Vrabel. So this pulled over by an officer thing is an indication that could Diana Russini have been a little too close to another NFL head coach? If she was that close to Mike Vrabel and didn't report that to her supervisors, and she felt comfortable enough to call an NFL coach when she got pulled over by a police officer for texting and driving with her children in the car, according to the New York Times, she was comfortable enough to make that phone call. It's important to know who that other NFL head coach was. And in my opinion, it should be that relationship should be given just as much scrutiny as the Vrabel relationship. That's what we call a red flag, in my opinion. The comfort to do that. I have John Stockton in my phone, NBA Hall of Famer. I've talked to John many times. I would not feel comfortable enough to call John Stockton and ask for that favor after I got pulled over by a cop. I wouldn't do it. Even if I knew that the cop was a Utah Jazz fan. Because I'm not that close. I'm not close enough to John to put him in that situation. Diana Russini is apparently feeling close enough to an NFL head coach who picked up the phone right away. A lot of times in media, coaches don't want to talk to reporters. You see the reporters calling, oh, crap, This coach picked up the phone as soon as Diana called immediately. And apparently, from what I understand from the Times article, played along and said hello to the officer. So this relationship now is very interesting to me. Who is it? Which of the 30 NFL head coaches did Diana Russini feel comfortable enough talking to, calling in that moment? The coach felt comfortable enough to pick up right away. And the coach apparently felt comfortable enough to help out, it sounds like, by all accounts, is what I'm understanding from the New York Times article. It sounds like Diana Russini had a close connection with another NFL head coach. This whole thing started because of her close connection with Mike Vrabel. That she did not disclose that conflict of interest to The Athletic. This creates the question, is there at least one other head coach who Diana Russini also had a closer connection with than people realized? The boldness to call an NFL head coach when you get pulled over by the police is, I'm not even going to describe it. I'll let you guys make up your own mind to describe that. But what did the Times say? How did the Times describe that? Apparently, The Athletic wasn't happy about this, that this took place. But The Athletic was not unhappy to the point where she lost her job, apparently. Will we learn more about this incident in The Athletic's report that we're all expecting to come out? If The Athletic releases their report and doesn't mention this, red flag. I mean, we're all sitting here trying to say, like, how seriously is The Athletic's report going to be? Is it a cover your ass thing? If The Athletic's report comes out and is public and they don't mention this incident right here with the police pulling Diana Russini over, from what I understand, while she worked with The Athletic, this report is about her journalism. She's a journalist for the NFL. This involves an NFL coach. That, in my opinion, would be a major red flag about The Athletic's integrity and accountability, The Athletic's ethics, if they had the boldness and the gall to release a report about Diana Russini being too close with Mike Vrabel and her journalism ethics and not mentioning this. Which is why this whole Times Athletic relationship is interesting. Because I showed you the theory that someone posited earlier. I'm going to put it up here on the screen. Bear with me. That this article was a CYA attempt. Remember, the Times and the Athletic are connected. Times owns the Athletic. Was a CYA attempt by the Times to make them look better. And I'm open to that. But couldn't you also play devil's advocate to that? That this is sort of the Times doing the opposite of that and harming the Athletic. This is the Times putting information out there, sort of out-scooping the Athletic, if you will. And now the Athletic's going to look really bad, in my opinion, if they publish their report tomorrow or a week from now and don't mention this incident where Diana Russini got pulled over for texting and driving with her children in the car and got an NFL head coach not named Mike Vrabel on the phone. That would make the Athletic look so bad, in my opinion. So I'm on the fence. Is this the Athletic? Excuse me, is this the New York Times attempting some sort of a CYA? Or is this the New York Times actually harming the Athletic and catching them off guard with this article? Or could it be both? Right? Where it's a CYA for this one particular person. I'd point out Ginsburg. Hey, he didn't have all the information. But at the same time, we're also putting the Athletic on notice. Hey, guys, You better mention that incident where she was pulled over by a police officer, because we just did. And now the public's going to be curious. Tank said, how do we know it wasn't McDermott? Sean McDermott, coach of the Bills. My understanding from reading the article, and guys, this is all happening fast. So you got to keep me in check here and make sure I'm not missing anything, because I went live minutes after reading this article. My understanding was that the Bills had already come up in conversation. I think it was something like she had told the cop, hey, I was on the phone reporting a Bills story. And the cop was like, I'm not a Bills fan. It was something like that. So we rule the Bills out. Time said it wasn't Vrabel. So there's 30 coaches left that it could be. Geographically, I'm wondering if it's Nick Sirianni, if it's a New York Giants head coach, if it's a New York Jets head coach, because those coaches are in close proximity. Nick Sirianni would be interesting because the Philly fans already have some feelings about Diana Russini and A.J. Brown, don't they? Didn't Diana Russini's good friend Mike Silver just go on the same Philadelphia radio station that gave Diana Russini an Insider of the Year award? And didn't that radio station just treat Mike Silver, Diana Russini's very close friend, very well on that 20-plus minute interview? And didn't that radio station mention Mike Silver's book? Didn't that radio station not ask a single question about Mike Silver's good friend, Diana Russini, or about the Athletics investigation? The Athletic is his supervisor. Didn't that Philadelphia radio station interview Diana Russini's good friend, Mike Silver, and not ask him about Chrissy Ford's allegations? In other words, Mike Silver has a connection to the Eagles. Mike Silver is very close to Diana Russini. Could Nick Sirianni be that head coach that Diana Russini called when she was pulled over? We can maybe get the body cam footage. We can maybe find out who the officer was. We can find out who that officer roots for. That's going to be fascinating to know. And thank you, Joshua, throwing out there. 94 Whip is the radio station in Philadelphia that I was referring to. And I've posted about this stuff on X. Speaking of X, I hate to publicize myself, but if you guys are enjoying this conversation, my X account is at Tony's Market Tips. I've posted information about that radio interview, about 94 Whip, about the Mike Silver situation. I've posted body cam footage from the April 15th incident where Diana Russini was supposedly involved in a daring rescue. And then I contacted that journalist, and 4 hours after I did, the journalist changed his story completely and said, oh, it wasn't a daring rescue. Diana Russini was just holding a dog. All my information about this story, the best stuff, isn't on YouTube. It's on X. It's in my articles tab. So please consider giving me a follow on X at Tony's Market Tips. If you're on X right now, you go up to my bio, there's a link up there that will bring you to my YouTube channel. YouTube is nice because you see these people commenting, right? And you can actually drop the comments if you're on YouTube. So that's the advantage to watching on YouTube. So if you can do me a favor and go up to the bio, click the YouTube link, subscribe to the YouTube channel. That helps me a lot, tremendously. If you're on YouTube right now, if you can give this a thumbs up. We still got a little more to talk about, by the way. We're not done. But if you can give this a thumbs up on YouTube, that helps me tremendously, helps the algorithm, helps this video get out there. If you're watching on Twitter, if you've enjoyed this conversation, if you can heart it on Twitter, that helps as well. If you can retweet it on Twitter, that helps as well. So much that we've talked about so far. Someone said, you're my go-to source for all bad things, Vrabel. I'm glad I'm your go-to source for something. I do want to throw out there too, by the way, at times during this story, I've defended Mike Vrabel and I've defended Diana Russini in various ways. You may remember the terrible story that was written about like Mike Vrabel's wife supposedly, and this is all false, by the way, supposedly was undergoing cancer treatment while Mike Vrabel and Russini were connected. And I was the first person to come out and be like, this is misinformation, guys. This isn't true. When the burner account story came out, we found Vrabel's burner account. That was all BS. I came out and I said, it's very difficult to prove someone's burner account. We shouldn't be running with this information. And so I just wanted to throw that out there because I do think there's a perception that, like, I don't like Mike Vrabel or Diana Russini. I have no problem with these people. I wish them the best. And I say that genuinely. I really do. No ill will toward Mike Vrabel or Diana Russini. I'm just sharing what I'm learning about this case, and I'm digging into it. And when good stuff comes out that supports them, I try to share that as well. So I wanted to make sure and mention that. Somebody mentioned Brian Daboll. He's the offensive coordinator of the Titans. That is certainly ironic. Chunky says, where do we go from here? Does Vrabel get fired? I don't think so. I don't think Vrabel's going to get fired. I think that, this sort of stuff might make the NFL a little more curious, and maybe they want to launch some sort of investigation or something like that. But I don't think Mike Vrabel gets fired. I think he's too close to Robert Kraft. I think if he was going to get fired, that would have happened by now. So I do expect Mike Vrabel to probably be the coach of the New England Patriots week 1, unless more information comes out, which we can't rule out because it certainly happened. But a lot of people have tuned in very recently. So I'm going to give a recap of the major highlights that we've learned from the New York Times surprise bombshell article that came out about Diana Russini today. 1, her salary with The Athletic is $800,000 a year. According to the New York Times, that's from a source close to Diana Russini's contract negotiations with them. A friend of Diana Russini said Russini served as an unofficial advisor to Vrabel while he was looking for a job the offseason after he was fired by the Titans. That's very, very interesting. She needs to be asked about that, in my opinion. What was her role? What was this advisor role? Because remember, she came out and talked very glowingly about Mike Vrabel in his New York Jets interview. New York Times said she was pulled over for texting and driving, and a police officer was shown a phone with his favorite team's NFL head coach on it. And the New York Times said this was an abuse of professional access for personal gain. The personal gain apparently being trying to get out of the ticket. Wasn't the first time she was texting and driving, apparently, according to the article. Russini and Vrabel worked together to coordinate their response after the Sedona photos. Russini did not tell her supervisors right away about the Sedona photos and this imminent story. She did contact the New York Times, which is the parent company of The Athletic, instead of her direct supervisors. Interesting decision. And then when The Athletic finally did find out about it, there wasn't much time left between that deadline. Apparently days had passed. Interesting. This is all according to my understanding of the New York Times article that came out very recently. Hope I'm understanding it correctly, because I read it and jumped on here as soon as I could, got my notes together. A former ESPN ombudsman, where Russini used to work, said that Vrabel and Russini were operating very flagrantly, at least with one example that he gave in this article. A friend of Russini said that she resigned because she saw an opportunity to reimagine her career and spend more time with her children. Russini did not alert her editors, this is a big deal, to any conflicts of interest involving Mike Vrabel. Ginsburg, the editor at The Athletic, who originally came out in support of Russini, was not given all the Sedona photos. They said he had at least one, but he didn't have them all. That means that either Russini held some back, or some were held back from Russini, or the Times is lying, and Ginsburg was given all those photos. I'm not sure which, but that's a huge deal, because that speaks to the conduct here. That speaks to journalism ethics here. That speaks to all sorts of stuff. That is a huge point that we're going to be talking about a lot in the next couple days. Ginsburg's statement in support of Russini was approved by other people at the Athletics, specifically David Rubin and Perpich, the Athletics executive director. I don't know how to say his last name. I'm sorry. Members of Mike Vrabel's coaching staff were present with Diana Russini and Mike Vrabel when they were photographed playing roulette together. They weren't in the photos, but they were there that night at the casino. That speaks to Diana Russini apparently having close connections, close enough to hang out at a casino with, not just to Mike Vrabel, but members of Mike Vrabel's coaching staff. Did the members of Mike Vrabel's coaching staff know that Mike Vrabel and Diana Russini were that close? Doesn't it seem like they must have known if they're all hanging out together at a casino? I'm speculating. This is my opinion. I'm not sure, but it brings several questions. Who were they, and did they know? That's really an overarching question about this entire situation. Did ESPN know? Did The Athletic know? Did the New York Times know? Did workers at ESPN know? Did Steve Levy know it when he sent out that infamous tweet about Diana Russini getting a nearly impossible interview during COVID protocols? These people like Mike Silver, who have been very quiet since this story broke, James Palmer, Sarah Slater, these people, did they know about Mike Vrabel and Diana Russini being close? Remember, Pablo Torre reported that it was an open secret in NFL circles that Diana Russini and Mike Vrabel had a close connection. So if it was an open secret in NFL circles, and I've shown you examples of people on Twitter going back to 2020 questioning how close Mike Vrabel and Diana Russini were. And by the way, they were called conspiracy theorists when they did, many of them. If Twitter seemed to know and it was an open secret, how did ESPN not know? How did Robert Kraft not know? How did the Tennessee Titans not know? How did The Athletic not know? It's possible more people knew about this, and that's why we're seeing some of this odd behavior. I have that article on Twitter, the 38 odd things that have happened since this story broke. We're seeing a lot of strange behavior. And one of the explanations potentially for this strange behavior in the media is because a lot of people were aware of this, and they don't want to admit that they were aware of this. That's my opinion. I don't know that to be true, but it seems like a logical possibility here. Other things that we learned. We learned that in May, the Times reached out to Diana Russini and she responded to them via text. That's a big deal because Diana Russini has been very quiet this whole time. Diana Russini has not publicly responded since her public statements and since her public resignation statement. She's been photographed. She hasn't responded. Well, she did in May. We learned that today. According to the Times, she did not establish beforehand that it was an off-the-record conversation. And after the text, she then said she didn't want this conversation to be quoted in the article. The writer said, "Sorry, Diana, can't do that. We didn't establish this as an off-the-record conversation." Diana then emails executives to sort of complain about this writer and say, apparently, this is what I'm gathering took place, and say, hey, I don't want this in there. I'd love to see that email. I wonder if that email will be released or leaked at any point. What was the tone of that email? Was it, I'd prefer you not do this? Was there legal threats? I mean, I'm curious. I'm curious the tone of that email. I'm also curious, and someone should ask the New York Times, why they waited so long to release that. Nobody's heard from Diana Russini since those public statements and since the resignation. And you have a text exchange with her back in May, and you're releasing it on June 24th. That's an interesting journalistic decision. I'll put it that way. What else did we learn today? So we got the salary was mentioned, the fact that the Titans staff was present at the casino the night that the pictures of Vrabel and Russini playing roulette took place. We know that Ginsburg did not have all of the photos, apparently. He had at least one, but not all of them. Diana Russini maybe could have held some photos back to make herself look better. That's possible. It's also possible Diana did give all the photos, and photos were held back by the publication. And it's also possible that Ginsburg did receive all the photos, and they're not being honest right now. There's so much here. I've got a list of like 10 things. Diana Russini's friend said she served as an unofficial advisor to Mike Vrabel. Questions need to be asked about that because Diana Russini was saying very flattering things while she was apparently working as an advisor to Mike Vrabel. Unofficial advisor. Secret advisor? Would that be fair to say? Unofficial advisor. I didn't know that she was his advisor. So if that wasn't public, would it be fair to call that secret advisor? New York Times said it was the second time she got pulled over for texting and driving. Her kids were in the car, at least this time. And an officer who was not a fan of the Patriots or Bills was shown a cell phone from Russini of his favorite head coach, his favorite team's head coach. And Diana Russini was bold enough to make that move. The Athletic knew about it. The Athletic apparently wasn't happy with it, calling it an abuse of professional access for personal gain. That was a line from the article. Drake, it's good to hear from you. Wow, a lot of people are just tuning in. All right, instead of going through these bullet points and giving you the details about why they matter and why they're important, I'm just going to go through all the bullet points and just tell you what we learned today. Diana Russini made $800,000 a year, roughly, with the Athletic, according to the New York Times. Everything I'm about to say is according to the New York Times. As part of its review that we're all expecting soon, the Athletic is going to talk about a January 2025 article called Inside Mike Vrabel's Year Off, written by Zach Rosenblatt and brokered by Russini. Questions about that article? Why was it written? Wait a second. I'm realizing some things in real time. Let's connect two things here. This article said Russini was working as an unofficial advisor for Vrabel. Zach Rosenblatt wrote an article about, this is all hitting me right now. Zach Rosenblatt wrote an article on January 25th titled Inside Mike Vrabel's Off Year. 4,000-word article. While according to Russini's friend, she was working as an unofficial advisor for Mike Vrabel. I asked earlier, why didn't Diana Russini write that article? We got to read that article. The Athletic is interested in this article from a journalism conduct perspective. And if Diana Russini's friend said she was working as an advisor for Mike Vrabel, if she organized this article, which I expect to read and be very favorable toward Mike Vrabel, that, I think there might be a connection there. I'm going to say this again because I'm processing this out loud, and I don't know how clearly I just articulated it. So I'm going to say it again. According to the New York Times, this is big. It's all hit me. According to the New York Times, Diana Russini's friend said she was working as an unofficial advisor to Mike Vrabel while he was searching for a job. By the way, strange. NFL reporter helping a head coach get a job? Like, what? That's odd. I'd previously reported that Russini said very flattering things about Mike Vrabel during his job search. Now the Athletic is interested in this January 2025 article by Zach Rosenblatt, who wouldn't respond to the Times, by the way, and Russini brokered the connection between Vrabel and Rosenblatt. Was that part of her unofficial advisor role? Was helping Mike Vrabel get a job by setting up this puff piece inside Mike Vrabel's Year Off article? Wow. The article was written in a way where they didn't really tie that together. And I just tied it together now in talking about it. Or maybe they didn't tie it together because they're unaware. This is live, guys. And I'm having some realizations in real time. And I don't know if the Athletic is even aware of this, or if the New York Times is even aware of this, which is why we should stay tuned to this Athletic investigation. It's going to be fascinating to see how much of this was covered. So I just promised you that I was going to go through this list of things and not dig into why these things are important. And I just went down a rabbit hole because I couldn't help myself. That was interesting. But I'm going to try again to explain what's important here. Russini's salary, $800,000 a year at The Athletic, according to the Times. Part of the Times review, the Athletics review, is to look at this 2025 article by Zach Rosenblatt entitled Inside Mike Vrabel's Year Off. A friend of Russini's said she served as an unofficial advisor to Vrabel during his job search. She apparently was pulled over by a police officer and got that police officer's favorite team's head coach on the phone. The coach picked up, and apparently it helped her get out of a ticket for texting and driving while her children were in the car. An ESPN ombudsman who worked for the same company that Russini used to work for said Russini and Vrabel were operating very flagrantly. A friend of Russini's said she resigned because she saw an opportunity to reimagine her career and spend more time with her children. Russini did not alert her editors to any conflicts of interest at any point with Mike Vrabel, according to the New York Times. Ginsburg wasn't given all the Sedona photos of Russini and Vrabel in Sedona before he made his decision that he eventually U-turned from. Ginsburg's statement of support for Russini was approved by the executive editor at The Athletic, Perpich, and David Rubin, the Times Company's chief brand officer and communication officer. Russini was given time to respond to the Sedona photos, but didn't tell the Athletic executive editors about the Sedona photos right away. She did contact the New York Times, the Athletic's parent company, and the Athletic's executive folks didn't find out about it, apparently, according to the Times, until a couple hours before the deadline that Russini was given. So it seems like there's a bit of perhaps lack of transparency from Russini in this process. Members of Vrabel's Titans coaching staff were present with Russini and Vrabel the night the roulette photos were taken. The photos that you guys have probably all seen. I posted them on my Twitter. You've probably all seen them. There are no other coaches in those photos. I looked, but apparently they were there that night, according to the New York Times. There's a lot here. And then the last thing I'll mention, the last bullet point that I have, is that thank you for saying I'm the GOAT, Shane. I appreciate the support, brother. The last thing that I'll mention here as I catch my breath is that the New York Times reached out to Diana Russini in May. We were previously under the impression that Diana Russini was not talking to anybody in the press. She had her public statement, her public resignation. Nobody's heard from her since. We just saw photos of her publicly. Well, now we know she did communicate with the Times in May. After that communication took place through text, she asked the Times not to publish that stuff. And the Times writer was like, this isn't off the record. I'm going to publish it. I'm paraphrasing. This is my understanding of the New York Times article. And she then emailed executives about not wanting this public. Diana Russini's a journalist. She understands how the off-the-record stuff goes. So that whole thing was fascinating, and it also tells us that she was communicating with members of the press in May. A lot to digest here. I appreciate you guys watching. This went a little longer than I intended for it to go. I appreciate the support. I'm going to ask one more time. If you're on YouTube, if you can go to the link in the bio above, click that YouTube link, follow my YouTube channel. That helps me tremendously. Hit that thumbs up button. It takes you guys 2 seconds, but it helps me so much. If you can hit that thumbs up button on YouTube. If you're on X, retweet this if you have enjoyed it. Like it if you've enjoyed it. There's going to be so much to discuss here in the next couple days. First two things I'm doing after I get off this live stream, I'm going to see if I can get my hands on that body cam footage. And I'm going to reread that Rosenblatt article from 2025 from a new lens, knowing that Russini brokered that and knowing that according to the New York Times, Russini was working as an unofficial advisor for Mike Vrabel. I'm going to read that article through that lens, and I encourage you guys to as well. Thank you all so much for the support. Over 1,000 people on this stream right now, 1,092 people. Really appreciate the support. I know I'm repeating myself, but if you can please hit that like button, it helps me a lot. We'll be talking on Twitter. Talk to you guys soon. Take care.